So in other words, the purpose here is twofold. First of all, within the limit of 50 minutes which I have to excite you about economics, to depress you about your chances, and to guide you about how to go about this so that you are all doing well. So we're here on a roller coaster now of emotions and feelings, so you'll be drained at the end of it, and so would I probably. But we'll be enlightened. This is the key thing. We're not going to be just drained, we're going to be enlightened. So, right. The experience ahead. And, how many of you here are taking economics as part of an economics degree? What I mean by this, do you have economics in the title of your degree? Okay. The rest do it under duress. Which is good. The best things are achieved from unhappiness and duress. You know, Beethoven was a very depressed man, so if you want to achieve greatness, you have to be quite depressed. If you're happy, something's wrong. So the experience, so of course there's a difference. I'm going to talk about the experience ahead here, first of all in a more general term, because to some extent I know it's none of my business why you're studying. You can say this. But on the other hand, I think it matters for you to understand why I think you should be studying, for you to understand what it is that we expect of you. Now, there is a bit of a problem here. First of all, there are cultural differences. And when I cultural differences, I don't mean necessarily cultural differences spanning all the way from sort of, say, the East, the Far East, and the West. No, the cultural differences may be much nearer to here. For instance, you know, England is very near, or the United Kingdom is very near France, you know, but I think that the ocean between England and France is much bigger than the Pacific Ocean. So in terms of cultural differences, the cultural differences can be actually very near, and there are cultural differences concerning the purpose of education. So when I'm asking you here, when I'm talking about the experience, I'm actually asking you, why are you studying? Now, I would not sort of go and ask each one of you individually, it would have been nice, but I imagine that most of the answers I'm going to get is something, well, you know, we want to improve our financial prospects. I'm not talking about economics, I'm talking about why you're studying in general. So, so probably because you say to yourself, well, you know, if I have a degree, as the literature suggests, which is absolutely true, graduates earn more than people who are not graduates. So if I want to increase my earning prospects, I should have a degree. Well, so this is one way of doing it. And of course, as I said, the funny thing is that if you do this, you will earn more, of course. This is also true. But, yes, it's interesting. Perhaps I should talk about this. About 2 years ago, something like this, I was asked, it was very strange, because we know we have projects in various parts of the world, and one of them is in Almaty, which is in Kazakhstan. Anyone here from Kazakhstan? It's very far. And it's a very big country, by the way. It's half of Asia is Kazakhstan, but we don't know much about it. Anyway, I was in Almaty, and I was asked to go to secondary school, I don't know why, to talk about studies in higher education. And when I arrived at the secondary school, they said, well, we don't even have a sixth form, so the only people we have are 13, 14-year-old students. So what are we going to talk to them about university? So I said, well, I'm going to ask them a question. So I asked the question to begin with. What do you want sort of to achieve? Or what do you sort of, why do you want to study? Or why may you want to study? And all of them said, majority, we want to make a lot of money. So then I started talking to them about, well, you know, don't you care about animals, about peoples, about other things? So slowly, the move from everybody wanting to study to make money, it moved away to wanting to do other things. Now, of course, you're not 15 years old, you're all adults and you know what you're doing. And as I said, I don't necessarily have the right to ask you why you want to study. But there are two, basically, I don't know whether this is actually now in my slide. Yes. There are two ways of thinking about studying. One of them is to learn how to do. That's to get a job. And the other one is really to learn how to learn. There are more or less a distinction, if you wish, in more sort of more colloquial term, between concepts like training, as opposed to learning, as opposed to education, and jobs versus what I would call capacity to live. Now, what do I mean by this? You see, when you go through a process of learning, what the learning is supposed to be doing to you is terrible damage. It's supposed to take you from where you are, throw you around, confuse you, punch you in your face, shatter all views you had about the world, leave you empty, naked, baffled, and in pain. That's when the education system achieves this, it's good. Why? Because, of course, it won't leave you like, if it leaves you like this, that's of course terribly bad. But it's supposed to, first of all, bring you to a position in which you are shattered, you just don't know where you are, you're confused, you are upset that you're confused, because you know you were in school, you were excellent, you knew everything, you were the best in class, and all of a sudden you don't know anything. And of course, afterwards, the idea is to try and put it together in order to create something new. Now, this pain, this abolition of your existing self and the creation of the new self is really what education is doing. But the new self that is created is not just a cog in a machine. It's not someone who can do a job. It's a new person. And what's more important, the main benefit of education will not be in your job. Will be in the way you will look at the world, in the way you'll understand the world. If you get up in the morning and you read newspaper, you'll read them very differently. You'll treat your wife very differently. She'll treat you very differently as well as a result of that. You'll treat everything differently. You'll be a different person, and this, what you learn, is supposed to serve you your entire life. It's not for the purpose of serving the machine, the economic machine. It's about yourselves. Now, it's not a long enough talk to really talk about the details of this difference, but this difference is fundamental, because when you're training, when you want to learn for a job, you approach the learning process in a very different way than if you really want to go through a life-changing experience. You prepare yourself differently, you have a different attitude, you have a different approach, and these things are detrimental. Now, as you can imagine, my view of education is very much the second, learning and the capacity of life, rather than the job and the training. And even when we talk about economics, and I'll come back to this in a minute. So, the discipline and the motivation that you will bring with you to the study very much depends on your initial disposition. And that's why I think it is very important to clarify it at this stage. You have to make sure what you're doing here. Let me say something, by the way, about learning for a job or learning for learning. You know, training or learning to do something in a job is actually not even good for jobs. Because what does it mean that you are training? It means that you are learning all of yesterday's technologies. By the time you get to the office, everything is new. So everything you learned how to do is no longer relevant. So what use do you have? None. There's a famous CEO, I don't know, he's not a famous CEO, but a CEO who wrote a famous article in the Harvard Business Review recently to say that his policy is never to recruit economists or finance people, only people from humanities. You say, why people from humanities? What can a graduate in philosophy of history know about business? Whereas you have spent all your life to know how to write accounts, you know, double entry and double entry again. You can have 4 courses about double entry. And then you know exactly how to calculate present value. And you're fantastic with these things. And you've also, you know, if you can do econometrics, you have all these software you can do, just put number, you're brilliant. And here he comes and he recruits this sort of lost soul that is looking at our world, you know. What's good, what's bad? Why? And by the way, at the same time, it's a very interesting phenomenon. There's a great, the Toronto, I think it was, no, I can't remember if it was Toronto or the University of Western Ontario, so you'll forgive me for the references here. But I think it was either Toronto University, was funded by a millionaire, whose name I also forgot now. But he was funding the business school for a number of years, and then he decided, I had enough of this. He took all the money and moved it to a school of philosophy. All the money from the Institute of Business to the School of Philosophy, for exactly the same reason. Now, what is actually hidden behind? I'm not trying to persuade you not to study economics, but to go to philosophy. But what is the reason? It's this. Because you see, what you need in jobs, I'm not talking about even life, is the ability to deal with things which are not familiar. So you see, if you are training as an economist, so wherever you see a problem, you will take what's in your box, what's in your toolkit, what you have brought with you. But if you're not trained by getting a set of tools, you're just trained very general, just look at the world and try and make sense of it, that's what you need. You need people who are looking at texts or pictures that mean nothing and trying to make sense of them. You need people who can, the reality is complicated, that's what businesses face. So even in terms of jobs, the training is actually useless. You don't need people who can do yesterday's technology. You need people who are sufficiently in contact with reality to constantly be altering it and change, not altering reality, altering their understanding and be able, of course, to alter reality with it. So it's about your command of the material. And that's, I'll come to this point in a minute, that's exactly the distinction I'm talking about in terms of the learning style. So, of course, if you have an expectation to only to get a job, so you well, tell me how to do a present value and send me home. And of course, then you expect the exam question to do, here is a number, what is the present value of this number? Oh, I know this, here, you end up and you go home. And that's fine. But then, of course, the outcome of this will simply be, the outcome of this event will be a transaction of money from you to the provider of the training. Nothing else changed. You will not know more than you knew before, and he'll be richer, of course. Right, so here's a metaphor to this particular story. It's a metaphor I introduced 2 years ago, which I call the mountains and disposition. So suppose that you have a mountain. Well, again, Almaty, you know, is at the foothills of the Himalaya. There's a lot of mountains. But let's suppose you're all greedy and you all want to learn because you want to get to your El Dorado, right? You all know El Dorado, yes? No?
City of Gold.
City of Gold, hidden, you know, Voltaire, Candide, yes? No? Never mind. Anyway, so you're on the way to El Dorado. So you have to go over the mountains. So what does it mean to learn what the job is to learn how to walk. If you have to walk from here to El Dorado, so to be trained is to learn how to walk. That means how to walk long hours. So that means you will be going around the heath for every day, you'll run around, you'll do all the training you need in order to be walking long distance. That's training. Will it help you to cross the mountains? Well, my answer is no. Why no? Because there are lots of routes in the mountain. The only thing you know is how to walk. So you can walk many, many miles every day, but the mountains are a labyrinth. They're complicated. You will not know where to go when you're getting there, you're getting near, or you can go in circles for all we know. You'll be very good in going in circles. You can persist for a whole time, but you will be going in circles. You will not get to your El Dorado. So what do you need in order to get to your El Dorado? You need to raise your head from the ground and look at the mountains. Not at the walking. Not at the mechanism that will take you through the mountains, but at the context within which your walking will take place. Mountains. So you have to look around. You have to understand the geology, perhaps, or the geography of it, to understand various routes and other things. Look at the map. Look at where you are. Look at how things relate to each other. Will that help you? The answer is yes, of course, because then if you are seeing everything from above, you can find your way. But there is a but here, this last however. And that is that, you see, suppose you climb, you see this peak, and you look around you, you know that this is the route that leads you to the peak. And you take all your energy, you get to the peak. What do you see when you get to the peak? Another bloody peak. Twice as high in front of you. So you say to yourself, well, you told me to keep my head high. The only thing I saw by keeping my head high is that I will never get there. That every time I get near it, there are even more things I have to cross and I don't know. But that's exactly what knowledge and learning is about. The only thing we learn is how much we don't know. But it's terribly important for us to know how much we don't know. So that we're not in the position as some government minister or some party political events I don't want to refer to, where people talk to you where it's clear to you that they don't know anything. They don't know how much they don't know, and ergo, they know nothing. So, as I said, but it is, what you need is that this desire to conquer the peak and the next one is important to fuel your quest for El Dorado rather than dampen it. So if you are in the process of study and you get to a position which you find yourself, it's too much for me, I can't cope. That's when you have just reached the peak and you see the other peak. So the question for you is then, should you go back or invest in knowing more? And which is something you should know. It's an ungrateful task. And in a sense, very depressing. Because, as I said, you accumulate knowledge and you just find, actually, that El Dorado is nowhere. That you're never going to get to El Dorado. So it's a life decision that you have to take, because it will affect all your attitude and approaches to how you deal with learning. So, what awaits you now, sort of down to earth, economics. So what awaits you in this particular course? Well, I raised a few points because I can't actually introduce the whole subject. But as you know, recently economics has been the subject of a lot of debate because of the financial crisis of 2008, and not to mention the crisis we face now. What did you find what happened when we faced this crisis? What happened when we faced this crisis? You had those people who said, well, there was too much regulation. Those people said there was too little regulation. That was it. Basically, what the crisis actually demonstrates, it demonstrates that economics is not what people think it is. It's not a profession. I would therefore sack all the economists. I would do that. Because the economists that work in the banks, all these people who appear on TV, says Lehman Brother investment consultant. So all these people who appear on TV and give you these advice, they are the people who were training for a job. Those are the people who trained for a job, and you're better off without them. So economics is not a science. It's not describing how the world is. What it is actually, it's a language. I'll come back to this a bit differently. It's a very complex and very sophisticated way which humanity developed in order to deal with the even more complicated and more sophisticated world of society. So economics is actually a social instrument. So that's why, by the way, all of you who don't have economics in your degree, you should have it, because there is no proper social study without economics. You don't have to agree with economics. But economics is the most advanced and most sophisticated attempt to understand social organization. And without it, you will know only very little bit of the story. So, it is a theory of organization. It's not, again, coming back to the question we talked about earlier, so are you here in the context of economics? If I asked the same question I asked earlier, are you here in order to make money? Well, the answer to this question, which I give repeatedly, is just take a look at me. I know economics. Do I look like someone who makes money? This is George fashion. For those of you who don't know, George is Asda. I don't wear money. So if you really want to make money, it's not, you don't have to study economics. Actually, making money is very simple. I'll tell you the secret. Do you want to know? Yeah. All right, I'll tell you. But don't tell anyone. Buy cheap, sell dear. But don't tell anyone. That's basically how you make money. There's nothing else to it. Okay? So if you want to study economics to make money, you already know what you need, you can go. So economics, therefore, is not about that. It's really about the following question. Society, there are scarce resources, and society needs to organize its activities in some way. How do we organize it? As you know, just to give you an example, Obama was trying to introduce reforms to the national insurance, to the insurance, health insurance in America. And again, I can't remember his name, sorry. There's a new candidate for the Republicans, who from Texas, I think. Yes. Now, I'm not forming any judgment here about what you should vote and who is good or who is bad, but just to listen to his rhetoric was fascinating. He was saying something like this. He was saying, because of what he thought about economic organization, he said, what? You mean to allow the state to do something that private individual can do by themselves? It's unheard of. We all know that was hidden behind was saying that it never works. Now, he was talking out of the conviction of someone who doesn't actually understand economics, but who reads something that economics is saying. It's not something that just he's saying, Obama had so many difficulties because if you ask people in the street about this, they would say the same thing. There was a famous research many years ago when Harlem wasn't gentrified. So Harlem was a very downtrodden part of New York, and interviewers went there and asked the people, would you like the state to increase taxes and pay more benefits to you, the poor, so that everybody's better off? And the majority of people said no. And when they asked why, they said, when I make my money, I don't want anyone to touch it. These are serious matters. Why? They all come from a complete misunderstanding of economics emanating from Adam Smith onwards. But what the financial crisis demonstrates, actually, is the complexity of economics, because anyone who teaches economics properly should have told you that economics is exonerated by the financial crisis. Why? Because if you know economics, you know that financial markets are inherently inefficient. Inherently. Not just sometimes, inherently inefficient. You don't need to know complicated theories for this. You need to know something very simple. If economics suggests that competition is good because it erodes excessive profits, right? Then, we can't see it from here. But if you look at the skyline of the city of London, if you look at Wall Street, if you look at Hong Kong Financial Center or Singapore Financial Center, you should ask yourself, where is this money coming from? Where is this money for these large glass buildings and caviar and Cadillacs? Where is this coming from? It's coming from the fact that there is no competition. There is no proper competition. Or in other words, there is competition, but it fails. So these complex ideas have been in economics. So from an economics perspective, I teach a graduate course in economics. I'm never embarrassed with the financial stuff because I always told the students, I told you so. I have actually given them a proof that financial markets are inefficient. So it wasn't a terrible news for me. It's a news for someone who doesn't understand. It's someone who treats economics as a tool. Here, this general equilibrium, we know therefore competition works. It's someone who doesn't engage with commanding the material. Someone who is a slave to the material rather than be the master of it. So if you are master of the material, you can understand these delicate differences, and it's very significant to almost everything you do. So economics is a theory of organization which deals with this question. Of course, economists tend to pretend as if they have to say about anything because they believe in the neutrality of the subject, which is a very big question. So for instance, if you want to organize a society of greedy bastards, right? Or you want a society on the same a society of pious monks, right? Would the allocation be the same? Would the organization principle be the same? Economists want to say, we can answer this question, it doesn't matter. But it's not actually true. And in order to see why it is not actually true and how it affects questions of organization, you really have to understand these things deeper. In other words, all of this leads to what I call, at the bottom here, the richness of the theory. So economics is being maligned because it's being portrayed and presented by people who studied economics as a tool, as a training. People who never understood that economics is the philosophy of what I talked about earlier. That's what it is. It's a language, it's a philosophy of organization, it's a principle. You can discuss it, and of course you don't have to agree with everything, but you have the means of making your points clear there. So, now, so the summary of it is that the way I perceive the subject, and which of course filters into the way this course is being conducted, is that economics is a way of thinking. It touches almost all aspects of social being, of us as social being. As a way of thinking, you know, thinking it is a language, so you have semantics, but you also have grammar. And grammar is logic. So we can't escape logic. So it's not like sociology, where you can say, well, you know, I think that 1 + 1 is 2, but it depends on my mood that day, you know. So you rely on this thing, it leads nowhere, so you have to rely on logic. And I'm just saying this because I know that the use of math in the subject is somewhat terrifying some of you, but there's absolutely no reason why it should be, because first of all, the use of it is very minimal. But once you understand that math is your friend, it actually helps you to understand the logic of complicated things, you should warm up to it a little bit and try and learn more, rather than take a disposition and say, math? I don't look at it. So just do it's only one little bit effort at the beginning, and then everything is very smooth. But as I said, there's only very basic math and diagrams in our story. Now, now down to the more sort of nitty-gritty things of what do we expect of you by way of the exam, right? So had you all been genuinely interested in learning, you say, we don't care about the exam, it's just the experience of learning that we want to know. But I know this, that no matter how great my power of persuasion, you still care about the exam. Anyway, so what do we expect? Well, what do we expect? Now, as I was suggesting earlier, there are two basic levels of knowledge which we can expect of you after 1 year. We take into account the fact that you study over 1 year. It's not a long time, but no, it's 1 year. What we expect of you, there are two levels of knowledge. The first one is the one we called material recognition. We want to know that you've actually looked at the material. Now, it may sound strange to you, but this is a serious matter. Why? Because the subject guide, did you all receive your subject guide? Yes. Now, yes, no?
No, sir. It's in the post.
It's in the post. Well, All right. Well, you should have your subject guide. It's something that looks like this. There's also a book which came out, which is based on, but it's more elaborate than the guide, which you'll find in the shops. But it's either way you choose. But what the subject guide, the response we get from people is they find it difficult. I don't know why, by the way. I find it very easy. But the response we get from people is that they find it difficult. So what do people, now remember the mountain. What happens to people who find it difficult but want to get to the other peak? They struggle. What happens to people who just want to know how to walk, to find a way around it? Well, they go into other textbooks. Now the problem is that there are many textbooks in economics, but none of them is actually fitting our program. Because, as I explained in many other places, most textbooks are written for the American market. The American market has an undergraduate degree which is not specialized. So students who are studying economics actually want to learn a little bit about economics. It's not the same as the English degree, which is a specialization in the subject. So most American textbooks are inadequate for our purposes. They're too low level. They're written also in this way. They're not that the people who wrote them can't write a different way, but they're written in a way they want to tell people, you know, economics is this, so you can have a general idea of what it is. But you are not in the business of learning what it is. You have to know what it is. You have to really internalize and command it. So the first level is we just want to make sure that you read the guide. So not reading the guide is not an option. Well, it is an option, of course, if you want to be here next year again. So not reading the guide is not an option, but I'll explain about the exam in a minute how it works. This means you ask blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so it means, in other words, so in terms of first chapter, you'll ask, do you know what a production possibility frontier is? So you can draw a production possibility frontier. Very basic things. But the way we design the exam in such a way that students who demonstrate that they have only achieved the first level of knowledge can get up to 50 points, 50%. So they can pass, right? So you can see that we are reasonable. We understand that it takes time. I mean, I talked about the ideal of what I would have liked, or what you should have liked to achieve, but different people achieve in different times, and we cannot have the same, we're not all the same, and therefore we say within a year we think of what is reasonable to expect of you. Well, it's certainly reasonable to expect of you to recognize all the material, and for this we allow you to pass. But you have to remember that you mustn't aspire to pass, because I referred earlier to the expectations you had. Now, the expectations I referred earlier were the more intellectual expectation you have. But there's also another level of expectation which you have to consider, and that's the expectation you have on your self-achievements, not just the intellectual one. So life has a way of teaching us lessons. So if you expect to pass, you'll fail. You always only get a certain percentage of what you expect. So if you expect to get 50, you'll get 30. If you expect 70 at first, you'll get 50. So you really have to expect to be brilliant to get 150, to get 100. But these things matter. So we give up to 50 points for broad recognition, material recognition, and you find it in an exam. The second level of knowledge is the command of the material. Now, this is what I said. This is the move from the one who knows how to walk the mountains to the one who can read the mountains and knows which ways to find and how to approach El Dorado. You see, when you learn a material, because your knowledge is so tenuous, you tend to become enslaved. You say, well, no. You're looking in these. You find a question in the exam. Say, where did they see it before? I have to have an example from before. You want to bring it in and put it there. You don't feel sovereign enough to say to yourself, I don't need memory. I know it. I can deal with it here and now. This is the position we want you to get to the end of this course, to say, not that you know only what things are, but that you can handle them. You understand the limitation. And you're not the fool of Lehman & Brother investment manager, right? So, how does that work? Even within this category of knowing command material, there are two levels. One is the idea to interpret the world in the language of economics. You see, because when economics creates a language to describe the world, the language is inevitably abstract, as any language is. You know, love. What does love mean? Do you know? It's an abstract concept, right? So we have language creates concepts, and if we are to make sense of the world, we have to be able to translate what appears to us as a daily event or reality into the language of the subject so that we can actually derive some conclusions from it. So this is actually the key thing, the ability to translate daily language into the language of models. So for instance, you will see examples, you'll see many examples, by the way. If there's a question, there's one year there was a question in the exam saying, Mr. and Mrs. Marmalade had a house with one spare room, and they were living on the slopes of a ski resort. And then one of the dinner parties, someone said, "Why don't you let out your room for guests?" and blah 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 blah. So it's a story that is described in daily language, but as you will see when you look at this question, it ends up being a very complicated model, upon which you can derive a conclusion about what would have been rational from an economic perspective for Mr. and Mrs. Marmalade to do with their room. But in order to get to that point, you really need to translate the story of the dinner table talk into a model. Demand, supply, or whatever you want to think about, right? So this is the first, and of course the second one is actually being able to solve the model. So each of these gets 25%, and that's how you get 100%. So 50% of marks go for recognition of material, 25% of marks going just to the ability to translate a question into the language of the model, and last 25% to your ability to use the model. So we're extremely generous in our marking, which may explain why the failure rate is only 45%. Now, I know that a lot of people are terrified and why is there such a high failure rate? And I honestly don't understand why there's such a high failure rate. Why, you may say, I'm just pretending. I'm not. If I could, I would have brought to you here to see the scripts of those who failed. There's one thing about those scripts which is evident from the beginning. The people who failed have never opened the subject guide. You can see it immediately. You can see it from the notation they use, you can see it from the diagrams they draw, you can see from everything you do. They have never, ever opened the subject guide. So, well, of course, if you don't study, you don't pass. It's as simple as that. I'm not saying that it's not inconceivable that someone that would put an effort and will not pass, but I don't think it is really very likely. I think if you put the effort, if you do the work, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to pass. So how to study? Well, you must first read the chapters in the guide. Now, again, as I said, there is, other than the textbook which is based on the guide, which is my own textbook, there is no other textbook which is actually appropriate for this course, because it falls in between these disciplines. So it's not, so don't hone yourself on the existing textbook, unless it is the subject guide itself. I think this, in my view, the subject guide is self-contained, by the way. I don't think you need anything other than that. You really don't need anything other than that. But some people find the subject guide a little bit difficult. Okay, so if you come across a concept which is difficult in the subject guide, it's perfectly okay to go back to another book and see how they present it. Maybe another way of presentation of the same idea may be more appealing to you. That's okay, but you must then come back to the guide. You mustn't be deluded to the fact that this was an easy presentation, I can stay there. No, you can stay there, but you'll stay there. If you don't come back, you're not with us. So you know we're a secret club. So the first thing is you have to, so what I advise is first of all to read the chapter in the guide. Then, well, if you have some difficulties, you go to the textbooks. When you finish reading a chapter, you must draw all the diagrams in the chapter and make sure that you understand every aspect of it. Now, in particular, things like slopes and other things, I do in the guide. There is, I think, at the end or at the beginning, there is a short. It's the beginning. Yes. No. Where's my glasses? Can't see. There's somewhere. Yes, it's the beginning. There is it's called a technical preface, which is giving you the basic mathematical concepts you use. It explains I do suggest you invest some time to make sure that these concepts are clear to you, because things like slopes are very, very important. They're not important from a geometrical perspective, they're important from the way we interpret them. And unless you understand what is the meaning of a slope, its whole function in economics will be useless to you. So we don't care about the geometry of it as we care about the interpretation, and that means you really have to read to understand what the slope is. So I recommend that you look at that chapter as well. Then, once you've finished, you read the chapter again, and you write a summary of it in your own words. What we're doing this year, and I hope that will appear on the VLE very rapidly, depending on how much time we have. For each chapter we are introducing, I will give some introductory notes, and then I will also solve some problem. So it'll give you some help in focusing your mind on what each chapter is actually doing. At the end of each chapter there are questions. There are more questions at the end of the book, but there are also in the subject guide there are questions. You have to do all of them. Not only the question at the end of the book, at the end of each chapter. As you know, you get 3 years back past exam papers, right? So you have an arsenal of 3 years exam. Each year it's 8 questions in each year. So actually 16 questions each year for the Zone A and Zone B. So you have an arsenal of all these questions to exercise with a full solution to all of them. Now, however, here's a warning. How do you do the questions? Well, the first thing you do when you do a question is you do the question without looking at the solution. You're only looking at the question. And of course, you're allowed to cheat, but as you know, you're only cheating yourselves. So if you jump immediately, if you find difficulty and you jump immediately to the solution, it's as if you haven't done anything. You read the question and you address the question all by yourself. So how do you do it? You first read it. Now, it may sound silly to you, but reading is not a simple thing. You know, a lot of people, certainly when they come to the exam, they do what I call this scan. You know, they have a scanner, they go through the question, and they look for keywords, and then download whatever is in the brain, in the memory on that subject. That's not reading. Reading is, you read a question as if there's nothing else, as if you just open a book and you read the story. You read it with total engagement, without thinking, what is the solution? Without thinking, what is the solution? So you ask yourself, what is the question about? And of course, when you ask yourself what the question is about, by making this sort of posing this choice, you will have to define the area within the subject for which there is a model relevant to this story. So you have a story, then you have to find which model is relevant to the story. This is the first choice you make. Once you have made the choice of the model, which is what I write here, you draw that model, you write the model down irrespective of the question. Why irrespective of the question? Because the question is complicated enough. At this stage, you just have to make sure that you bring back to your life the model in its original state before you start manipulating it. And then comes the key thing. Now you have a model in front of you, X, Y, U, all these things, and you have a story. Mr. and Mrs. Marmalade want to rent a room and all the blah, 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 blah. How does this story about Mrs. Marmalade relate to X, Y, U, PX? All of these translations occur here. Now, it may sound very difficult, but there are a lot of examples for you, and the more you do it, you get more experience in doing it. And that demonstrates that you have become the commander of the material. If you can't do that, the material dominates you. Okay? So you translate the question. Of course, the last thing is to solve the problem. But notice that this is the last thing. We only care about the process. So when we mark you, we don't mark you as if we ask you the question, what is the right answer? Yes, this is the right answer. All the points, go home. We don't care what the right answer is. We mark you like a driving test. You know, you don't know when you go on a driving test whether an old lady is going to jump out in front of the car. Do you know that in advance? No. But the tester sits there and takes notes. He fell in love with the old lady. Okay, so he notes what you do. Of course, excessive response to that would be failure of the test, of course, because he only had to pay insurance, not had to marry her. Anyway, so the point of the matter is that we look at what you do and we give you points to almost everything you do. So it is quite possible for someone to get the wrong answer to get more point than someone who had the right answer. Because if your right answer is accidental, so is the mark. Okay? Right. So that's basically about how to address questions in the exam. And of course, as I said, then after you've done this, after you've answered this question, you've looked at all the questions in the exam which are relevant to the same topic, and you do them in the same systematic way, what is the next step? The next step, suppose there was this question about Mr. and Mrs. Marmalade. You try to answer it, and you got the wrong answer. Okay, so you go to the answer that's given, and you look at the answer, and say, yes, right, that's it, now I understand. No, you don't. No, you don't. This is the key point. This is the fantasies, the illusion of learning. Because I told you, it's so painful that the body invents way of alleviating the pain. A delusional sense of understandings. Why? Why is it not the end of the story? Because surely when you answer the question 5 minutes before, you were convinced that what you did was right, weren't you? So how come now you're so convinced it was wrong? In 5 minutes, your conscious and understanding switched to this level? Impossible. The only thing you're saying with your excitement of, yeah, I understand, is that you understand what I did. But learning is not knowing what other people know. Learning is about knowing it yourself. And you're not being tested about what do I know, me personally. You're personally, what do you know? So when you say, I understand what he's doing, you're telling me that you have a passive knowledge. You understand. It's very important, by the way, not unimportant. Because some people may not even understand that. But you understand at least what I was doing, so you understand the logic of my argument, but you haven't yet internalized yet. It's not yours. It's not yours. So how do you make it yours? Well, you go back to the question and you start asking yourself, why did I do, you did A, so-and-so. You ask yourself, why did I do so-and-so, and why did he do something else? And you go systematically each point to eradicate all loops and failure in your logic. Now, the best way of doing it, I keep telling students on all occasions, is through talking. Because sometimes, you have to learn things by heart, I'm learning by heart text for the hypochondriac now. But when you learn the text by heart and you just sit in the underground, you mumble it, you don't actually know it. You only know it when you actually say it. So cognition, or wording, or when you actually say things, you jump a level of cognition. So if you really want to make sure that knowledge becomes yours, the best way of doing it is to try to transmit it to someone else. So you were forming whatever this thing is. Well, study group. You were forming study group, very important, climbing the mountain, yes. Maybe you should meet on the peak of the Everest. But that's a good idea. Study group has to meet somewhere that people already have to put a lot of effort to get to. So, okay. So in the study group, so one way in the study group is for everyone to present an answer, to tell the others what is the answer. And as I say on other occasions, if you don't have a study group, you have friends, you can always, if they're good friends, they'll be willing to listen. And if you don't have friends, you have family members, they have no choice. And if no family members, they're animals, you can talk to your cat or dog. And finally, if all fails, you can always talk to the mirror. So Narcissus, mirror, mirror on the wall. What's the answer to this question? Anyway, so the key thing is that you really have to engage in a cognitive, in an articulation of your understanding in order to make it all your own. Now, once you've done this, feel the breeze on the top of the mountain. And you will be able to look at Osborne on TV and laugh your head off. Well, laugh your head off in one way and then pay the price. So this is the difference between listening to Osborne say, oh yes, he's right, I'm going to sell my house and buy some stock in Lehman Brothers. Or look at Osborne say, rubbish, I know better. That's the big difference. And if you want to be in this position, you have to do everything I told you. Life's not easy. Life's not easy. And if you really want to be happy, find it somewhere else. Happiness. This is the mud of our spiritual existence. Deep.